You're listening to the Utah Checkdown podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you once again. It's a Thursday. We're coming at you later in the week. We've got more stuff, but we're coming later in the week. It's a beautiful day outside. It's getting closer to summer, and kids are almost out of school. I don't know if that's a good or bad thing for you, but we're getting close. And summertime means a lot of fun, and then we get into fall, which is obviously the best. So I appreciate you joining me today. We're going to talk a few things, stuff like Cam Rising and his announcement yesterday. And then I'll be joined by a special guest to talk about Utah in the Big 12. So we'll do that and kind of see some of a different perspective on kind of Utah and everything related to that. So but first, let me tell you about our partners. Every possibility begins with a spark, and possibility can only grow into something even better than expected. With a clear view of what matters most, your possibilities are endless. From its first flicker at the University of Utah, U First Credit Union has grown to meet its potential and ignites your possibilities. They've grown into Canyon View Credit Union. Same roots, new path. Welcome to Canyon View Credit Union. Check out the full details at canyonviewcu.com. All right, so we're going to jump into this. We've got Cam Rising. Yesterday on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, he decided to announce he was medically retiring. His exact phrase said, "Due to a hand injury I suffered during the Baylor game, I've been advised by 2 orthopedic physicians that I will never be able to return to playing football. I'll be obtaining a third medical opinion and will undergo the recommended surgery. I will continue to rehab and do all I can to get healthy. In the meantime, I will unfortunately be forced to medically retire from the game I love." What a crazy turn of events for Cam Rising. I mean, everybody kind of knew that the end was near simply because of that injury. But it was one of those injuries sustained that I don't think people really understood the magnitude of, right? It was easy to kind of look at it and say, oh, it was just kind of like an injury to his finger after hitting into the hydration, the Gatorade table. And instead, there was a lot of nerve damage and some other issues that made it really difficult for him to throw the ball. And after the entire year of 2023, where it was a guessing game of would he or wouldn't he play after his ACL injury, it got to be a little frustrating for a lot of people. A lot of people got tired of kind of the injury excuse, and they just wanted to see Cam Rising out there. And unfortunately, Rising tried to give it a go in the Arizona State game. He wasn't 100% fully healthy. But he'd heard the noise, right? Like, he can't not hear the noise about who he is, and he's just sitting there taking all the money and doing all this stuff and kind of bilking Utah for all they're worth so that he can cash a paycheck, when in reality, he was just not physically ready, right? And so he goes out there in that Arizona State game, and the rest is kind of history. It was just kind of a really terrible performance, one that, he was unfortunate to be a part of. It's going to be the last memory that a lot of Utah fans have of his legacy, and it really just kind of put a tarnish to kind of the whole situation. And unfortunately for Rising, he took a lot of the flack for situations that were out of his control, right? You can't force your body to heal, but at the same time, there was a lot of secrecy around kind of his injury, and there was not a lot of knowns going into this. You had Kyle Whittingham that plays his injury game where he doesn't, talk about things. And so a lot of that was put on Cam to really just kind of be the scapegoat, so to speak, of kind of everything that went on. So it's an unfortunate situation for him. Obviously, there's a lot of love for Cam Rising, and I think the longer this goes on, time heals all wounds type situation, more and more I think, Cam Rising is going to be viewed as one of the best quarterbacks to come through Utah. Now, with that said, Was he the most skilled? No, but I think based on what he was able to do for the program, there's no question that he was, one of the greatest to be there. Coming in, he comes in, and obviously his whole career was riddled with injuries. But at the same time, those 2 years, especially where he was able to take them to the Pac-12 championship, I think are going to be remembered as some of the most fond memories for the current generation of Utah fans, right? You had the USC game in the regular season where he had to go for the 2-point conversion. Utah goes all in that second half and rally from behind to come back to quote unquote steal the win from Caleb Williams. And then they go back and they do it in the Pac-12 championship a year later. They do it on the road, after the Ty Jordan and Aaron Lowe situation where the team was down in the dumps, right? They needed some sort of victory, more than just a football game. But anybody that witnessed that understands kind of the cathartic feeling of what that game meant to that Utah program. And Cam was instrumental in that, right? They had the accidental flea flicker that they got the touchdown. There was a lot of important moments in Utah history that were in the Cam Rising era. And, you get that Ohio State Rose Bowl game, which I was talking to someone the other day who was just, reminiscing about that game, just saying like there's so many things about that game that they still remember, right? And a lot of that reason is because of Cam Rising. Look, there's other players, right? You had Britton Covey's touch or kickoff returns. You had, Devin Lloyd. You had all these other players that were involved in these types of things. Clark Phillips, the third. There's a lot of athletes that made up these rosters that helped, but a lot of it was a result of Cam Rising, right? He brought a kind of swagger to the program that was needed, right? And there was a lot of juice, quote unquote juice, that came because of his kind of mindset and bringing and rallying the guys around in the program, that even when they had teammates that had died and they had, terrible situations on the field or whatever that may be, he was always kind of the stable force and rallied the troops and got them there. And I think that's why specifically last year there was so much hope that he could bring Utah back, right? That they could go into the Big 12 and suddenly run the table because of the undying faith that Cam Rising was this, folk hero, so to speak. The Bad Moon Rising, the music played on the PA system and everybody freaks out because of how excited they were. So it's unfortunate though that, a little part of the game where, something where he could have thrown away the ball, he couldn't have been pushed out of bounds. There's a lot of things that could have taken place, but the ultimate competitor wanting to make the play decided to keep going with it and ended up ending his career. And so it's unfortunate, it's unfortunate to be able to see that for him. You never want to see injuries derail a player's ability, but at the same time, it's part of life, right? And fortunately, he was able to collect a good amount in NIL, and I know that frustrates some people, but I think just based on what he did for the University of Utah, I think the money was more than justified, and I think people would be happy about that. As part of that, he has accepted an offensive coordinator position at his high school, Newberry Park High School. So you're going to see, you're not going to personally see unless you go watch him, but you're going to see him in the coaching ranks, right? You're going to see him kind of testing his hand there. One of the things that separated him, especially since he didn't have the skill set that some other guys did, is that he was just a brilliant mind, right? As much as Andy Ludwig had his Bible of offensive plays and things that were complicated, Cam Rising learned it all, right? And he learned how to work with Andy Ludwig. And the two of them had this kind of symbiotic relationship where they understood each other at a level that many couldn't. And so the fact that you could get the two of them working together and be a quote-unquote nerd of the game really changed. So really curious to see kind of the career arc for Cam Rising. I know a lot of Utah fans would love to see him come back to Utah, maybe be in a coaching role somewhere down the line. But I think it's going to be some time, right? I think there's going to be some things that need to heal before that happens. So that's the end of the Cam Rising era. I know it's tough. I know Utah fans, you're moving on to Devin Dampier and everything. And so, it's not too long of a wait. But it's putting to rest an era that I think a lot of Utah fans really relied upon and enjoyed and there's a lot of core memories that were built during that time. So, but we're gonna move into our special guest here, and we'll get into it. So with that, let's jump into it. All right, joining me right now is a special guest. His name is John Kurtz. You may have seen him on YouTube. You may have seen him on Twitter. You may even subscribe to his newsletter called Open for Business. He's everywhere. He's ready to talk the Big 12. He's ready to talk college football in general. Did I miss anything, John?
No, you nailed it. I appreciate that. That was a nice intro. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. First off, I guess I should say, how are you doing? How's the off season treating you?
It's been good. It is, as we were just discussing, it's lively, wild these days. Everything that you wind up covering and trying to follow what's going on with the House settlement and, where the future of the sport is going. It's not so much, I guess for once, not so much conference realignment necessarily this summer, which is a nice reprieve from that. But now everybody's talking about 2030 and what's going on. So no real off season for most of us, but it's been good. That's also, I guess, for those of us in the content game, it's a double-edged sword because it also gives us plenty of stuff to talk about all the time.
For you, what's that life like? Because your whole role is to be online, right? Like your whole job is to be either on YouTube or making sure that people are informed of different things within college football. What's that life like for you, and kind of what does the day-to-day look like?
It's interesting because I do work a day job, a marketing job. So I used to, for those that I guess aren't totally familiar with my background, I covered K-State full time for 10 years. 2011 to 2021. And so I was doing a daily radio show when I was at all the press conferences, and I did pregame radio for football, basketball, all that. So it used to be my full-time gig. I moved back to Kansas City, which is where I'm from, and took just a PR job on a marketing team for just a 9-to-5 day job. And so outside of that, obviously a lot of my free time then becomes trying to make sure I'm keeping up with the YouTube show. One thing, I guess, I don't know, the Utah fans are that interested in it, but I do a K-State podcast as well with a couple guys who are kind of in the same boat as me. One who still covers the team, one who used to cover the team. So a lot of mornings, like this morning, we did that at about 7:30, 8 o'clock this morning. So wake up, do that. A lot of days, then it's either work from home at the day job. Some days I'm in the office, go to the office. Then it's come home and prep for the YouTube show a couple of nights a week. I try to use Twitter just as a tool to stay up to date on everything more so than anything these days. I kind of just use it like an archive to retweet things to come back to, and then I'll use that. And then I try to squeeze in like an hour and a half to write the newsletter there a couple times a week also. So very busy, but I'm used to it, and this as well as I do. Like you come up in this game covering college sports and in the media environment that we have come up in, there's really no time for a reprieve, man. You just get used to constantly churning out content.
My favorite thing is talking to people that don't really understand fully what I do. They're just like, oh, you get to go to games. That must be fun. And it's like, well, yeah, but like at the same time, that's like the capstone to everything that's taken place the rest of the week. And there's a lot more that goes into sports journalism, but I'm not going to sit here and complain. I'm not going to say, woe is our profession, right?
Right. Yeah, I know. I get it. Like people would definitely love to be up in the press box, doing what we're doing, talking to the athletes and coaches all the time. So I'm not asking anybody to shed a tear for us. But the other thing is just like, games happen on nights and weekends, right? So you're grinding like a regular 9-to-5 if you're working in it full time. And then you got the extra stuff that's actually exciting that are games, and that's great, but it can make it tough, to have a personal life and a family life and all that. So yeah, there's sacrifices for sure.
Oh, for sure. We could talk the whole podcast on that kind of stuff, but
yeah,
we're not going to. So first off, I just kind of want to get your take on the Cam Rising situation. Yesterday, he announced that he's medically retiring. The Big 12 didn't really get to see the Cam Rising era, right? Obviously, you can look back on his time, a couple of years ago when he took them to the Rose Bowl in back-to-back years, won 2 Pac-12 championships. But I can't imagine there's a lot of Big 12 people that have really watched his game. For somebody like you that tries to stay, on top of things a little bit, I guess just kind of what are your general thoughts of just kind of the end of Cam Rising, knowing that he was expected to lead Utah to a Big 12 championship last year?
Yeah, well, it really strikes me that you made that point about Big 12 fans just haven't had a chance to really see him up close and personal at his best. I mean, obviously I'm a big college football fan. I've seen Cam Rising play before. And, I think most people in college football were watching the Rose Bowls. But like, it sucks that we never got to see that happen in the Big 12. I was really looking forward to it. I remember, did they open with Southern Utah?
Yeah.
Yeah. I watched a bunch of that game this past year. And like, that was really fun. It was like scoring a touchdown on the first 5 drives straight to start the game or whatever. And it was like, man, all right, like this is legit. This dude looks like he's going to be really, really fun to watch. And he's just like, as someone who loves college football, like a guy who stuck around as long as he did at Utah. And I know that obviously his career started elsewhere, but I still think in this era of college football, it's pretty impressive how long he wound up staying at one place and tried to battle it out through the injuries and everything that happened, and had such a high level of success there, and seemed like kind of the perfect archetype of a quarterback for the Utah program, like very much embodied like what that program is about, and seemed like such a great pairing with Kyle Whittingham. It is disappointing that the Big 12 never got to fully witness that. So yeah, I mean, my heart goes out to him, and I wish him nothing but the best in the next stage of what he is going to do. Looks like he's going to get into to coaching. I mean, I hope all that goes really, really well for him, because I think he did a lot of good for college football, and certainly seemed like a good dude, by all accounts, honestly, and a fun dude. One of my only memories of Cam Rising actually is the comment that he made about BYU at Big 12 Media Days last year, where I was like, okay, like I like this guy, I was thinking, oh, he'd be maybe a little bit dry. And then I was like, oh no, he's not afraid to come out and say something. So, all the respect in the world for him. And, I think everybody knew it was coming, right? That he was going to just medically retire. I think it's the right time for both parties to move on. I think we'll talk about this more. I'm pretty high on Utah this year, basically because I just think, the last couple of years maybe put too many eggs in the basket of like, he'll be able to come back and be healthy, but you kind of owed it to him. And he was a guy with the upside that I understand why you would do that. But now I think it's the right time to separate and just kind of give him his flowers for his career.
Yeah, Utah definitely, respects a lot of what he did, but they also, at the same vein, weren't prepared last year because they simply put all their eggs in the Cam Rising basket, right? And so, I don't know that naming a true freshman as a backup was the wrong decision, but I think the way that they kind of orchestrated it didn't help, right? And so Utah ends the season with a 5-7 record. You go into the season picked to win the entire conference. There was a lot of optimism about them, even though there were still a lot of unknowns, right? A lot of people wanted to know how Utah would translate to, a different style of the Big 12. And I don't know that the Big 12 fans really still have seen that, right? And I understand, every team goes through these situations, right? And so it's not easy to kind of put that on them. But it was an interesting situation to kind of make that change. But kind of that does lead me to kind of the point you're talking about. You're high on Utah, right? Like last week, you published a newsletter that was talking about the Big 12's best football programs. And you listed a bunch, and I don't want to give everything away. I'll let you do that if you want to do it. It's your stuff. First off, I would encourage anybody to subscribe to his newsletter. It's real easy. You just go to the website. You can subscribe to it. You send them pretty frequently. They're not daily, are they? I get them, but I'm trying to remember, are they daily?
I'm doing twice a week right now. I've dabbled at times or 3 times a week, but it kind of depends on my schedule. So twice a week is what I can guarantee you.
That's good enough, honestly. But there's a lot of stuff, a lot of information packed in there. You obviously have kind of a lead story to kind of get people in, and then you throw in some other tidbits, which I really appreciate. So, kind of break this down for us. You're looking at the top Big 12 programs, and this isn't looking at it from just a year-to-year type basis. This is more of kind of a holistic approach, looking at kind of the trajectories, kind of all that kind of stuff. Kind of break it down and kind of tell me a little bit why you picked Utah to be so high.
Yeah, and if you do want to go read it, I had Utah at number 1, and you can go to ofbnews.com, so like open for business, ofbnews.com, if you want to get signed up there and read it. But I was trying to, instead of like, I think everybody gets really wrapped up in, and I knew this would happen when I put out the list, and you get people, particularly like some BYU fans, like, what, Utah number 1? Did you see him last year? And I'm like, okay, we're talking about a program. Like, let's define what we want a program to be. So I said, like, last 5 to 10 years, kind of like last decade of what you've been. There's something to be said for tradition beyond that. And I kind of included that with a couple other things in like a other category, but really we're looking at what have you been the last 10 years? What kind of a head coach do you have? yes, what kind of a team do I think that you're going to have this year? And then sort of this other like tradition, location, proximity to talent. NIL was another one of the big pillars there too, obviously, which matters in today's day and age. So taking all that into account, it's a really tough exercise. Like I could listen to, I mean, this is sort of the story with the Big 12, right? You've got so many teams that are so close in terms of resources and tradition, basically everything I just rattled off there. So how do you decipher and determine who's number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Like you could make a case for, I think I went all the way down the list to like, there's probably like 9 or 10 that I would listen to you making a case for being in the top 3 at least. But for me with Utah, it came down to like, okay, last 10 years, nobody else in the league has 2 Power 5/4 conference championships. So let's start there. I'm trying to, maybe you can help me out with this number. Was it 5? It's like 5 or 6 9+ win seasons in that time span.
Yep.
Which I also believe was number 1 by a nose. It was like Utah and Oklahoma State that are competing with that head coach. I mean, I think Kyle Whittingham's a Hall of Fame head coach. So you can say what you will, and there's probably a discussion to be had about like, okay, is he, obviously he's in the back 9 of his career, but how close is he to that? Does he still have some of the magic left? I mean, I still believe in him as a really, really effective college football coach. And then what do I think of the team coming up this year? I mean, I'm pretty high on it. Like, I think they're always going to have a defense. Like, I don't doubt that Utah will be able to put together a defense. And I love Devin Dampier and the potential with him at quarterback and just moving on from Cam Rising, which was a difficult situation. I recognize you kind of sparked my memories. I was listening to you talk about this. Like, yes, maybe there's some criticism there, and I levied some for putting all the eggs in the Cam Rising basket, but also like, what else are you supposed to do? You know, I mean, you couldn't really totally move on from him, which is the only way you could get a high level transfer in there. So you'd be threading a tight needle to try and get some other, you know, more ready to play transfer who's going to think he'll be sitting behind Cam Rising all year. So anyway, I understand it was just a tough spot. I think it was just an awkward position for a couple of years with the program. And as long as Dampier hits, and yeah, you've got to transition him up a level, but I think it helps when you're bringing in his offensive coordinator. And obviously they've done a good job, I think, supplementing with some good running back help through the transfer portal as well. Like, I just like a lot of what I see out of that team next year. They're going to be able to play the kind of nobody respects us card. Like, people have sort of forgotten about Utah a little bit. I was looking at some preseason top 20 or post-spring top 25s this week, and like, man, yeah, there's just not a lot of buzz or love there for Utah because there are so many other teams that had good off seasons and had good seasons last year. But we saw Arizona State go from worst to first, right? I mean, we know that it's pretty easy to do that in the Big 12. So I believe in all of those factors with Utah, and by a nose, I gave them number 1. Then it just gets so tough. Like, I wound up with TCU at number 2, and I don't even particularly love Sonny Dykes as a coach, but if you are being objective about it, I mean, the guy's coached in a national championship game, and he did win 8 games last year. So, you know, he's averaging 9 wins a season as coach. And the thing about TCU's program is that they have multiple 12+ win seasons over the last decade, and nobody else has been able to touch like TCU's top level, which I think some of that is proximity to talent, being in Texas, and even in a portal world where you need NIL, it also helps when it's like guys coming back home. You know, I mean, they felt like they took half of Alabama's reserves last year that were Texas guys coming back home. Like, I think that really helps and makes a difference. So I was trying to be just really take my feelings out of it and just be objective about it. And if you look at the objectivity of what TCU's program has been, it's hard to argue with their high highs. And then kind of the opposite, I wound up with K-State at 3 because it was like, well, Chris Kleiman has just been, outside of the COVID year, he will win 8+ games. Mm-hmm. And every once in a while he jumps up and wins the Big 12, which he did in 2022. I think their team should be pretty good this year. They need Avery Johnson to take a step forward, but they did a good job in the portal. I think they've added a lot of talent. There are a lot of great pieces there if he is able to become a more consistent quarterback. But you just know Kleiman is just a definition of consistency. We can certainly argue about his ceiling, and K-State fans, I think, have issues with his ceiling here at this point. But because of that consistency, I put them at number 3, right? And so, especially once you get beyond that, we're really talking about, you can make arguments for anybody. I gave Oklahoma State the benefit of the doubt and still kept them in the top 5, but it's like, man, they could, if Gundy sucks again this year, I mean, they'll just drop like a rock. Like, now we're talking about a major trend there. BYU, I had just on the outside looking in, where I'm like, okay, I need to see Kalani Sitake do it again in a Power 4 league. If he does, then I think you can say, all right, well, they they vault way up there. If they're going to win double-digit games again this year, I just need to see that happen again and make sure there's not a real regression this year. So it's kind of a fun exercise, and it was interesting. I posted the question on Twitter asking people, like, what are your top three? And I mean, the answers were just all over the board. Like, I'm not sure that I got two that were the exact same the entire time, which is kind of the point of, one, the conference right now, and two, the exercise in total.
It's interesting, as you were going through that, early on, it seemed like Utah and TCU, they were on the similar career arc in the terms that they left the Mountain West. They both went to two different Power 4, Power 5 conferences at the time. And there always felt like, at least from Utah, you were always kind of checking in on TCU. How were they doing? Early on, like, what were they doing? How was Utah compared to them? And both of them kind of had their rise, right? Like, they both kind of went through their own ups and downs. TCU kind of had their issues and then came back up and did different things. Obviously, get to the national championship game a couple of years ago. But it always felt like these two programs, they were near the top with BYU in the Mountain West, and then they decided to go their different ways. And so now it's crazy to come back 10 plus years later. That's probably more 15 at this point, to be able to see it and kind of see that those two are the ones that are consistent in the top of the Big 12, right? Like that, listening to you say that is just kind of funny, because I've been following Utah since they joined the Pac-12. That was my first year of joining or following Utah as a beat reporter. And so it was interesting to kind of watch this kind of quote unquote glow up for both of these programs. And now they're at the top of the Big 12 in your eyes. And I don't think that that's far off from many people, right? Like you said, there's many of these teams that you could put in there. Oklahoma State has been a pillar of consistency for a long time. Last year was kind of more of an anomaly in terms of what we've seen, but there's a lot of consistency there. And so the fact that you can have these two programs that are 15 years into their power life cycle is pretty fascinating to be able to see where they can be. So I don't know. I don't know if I have anything off of that, but I think it's just kind of a fascinating kind of career arc for both of these programs.
Well, that's a great point you bring up. I hadn't even thought about that when I was making the list. Like, yeah, if you would have shown this list to somebody 20 years ago, one, they'd be like, well, what the hell is going on with
Exactly.
Utah and TCU in the Big 12? But obviously, yeah, like teams that have had a glow up and done it the right way, man, just knew how to come in and compete right away in sort of different manners, which I think is the interesting part too. And not that Utah has not had high highs with a couple of conference titles and a couple of Rose Bowl appearances, but TCU has played for one national championship. They probably should have been in the college football playoff back in 2014 when they were ranked number 3 in the next to last, the penultimate rankings, and then fell out after beating Iowa State by like 50 points. We all know the controversy surrounding that, but they've had like two national championship game-esque seasons really in that time span, which is crazy. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about that for TCU and where that program was at. And then others were still, you've got another Sugar Bowl appearance mixed in there. Like, they have just been able to swing big with the talent that they're able to bring in the locale that they're in. Meanwhile, they've had some real bottom drops out years where they're missing bowl games, and that's what Utah has really avoided that for the most part. Last year, obviously notwithstanding, but Utah's been this more solid, steady, consistent, and then jump up toward the end of that Pac-12 era. But it really is astounding, and it's an incredible testament to a bunch of different things at both schools. Obviously, maximizing your resources, but also just leadership and hiring great football coaches. Maybe we're making too much of it, and you can just boil it down to Kyle Whittingham and Gary Patterson, basically, as being the reason that was able to happen for both.
It's kind of crazy how that goes, but that's why we love this game. It's fun to be able to watch, and consistency does matter even in the NIL in the NIL era, and so it's kind of fascinating to kind of see how this will all go. We're getting closer to the end of the transfer portal, right? We're seeing a lot of teams kind of solidifying their rosters. There's still going to be some movement, but I'd say by and large, most of the rosters that these programs will have are set, right? And so I think now's the time where you and I, as we get close to Big 12 Media Days, which will be in July, early part of July, we're going to start having to figure out kind of who we think is the top dog, right? Last year, like we said, Utah was picked to win the conference. That's not going to be the case this year. I'm fairly confident there's not going to be a pick for Utah at number 1. Maybe somebody throws it out there. I would be very surprised. But with that being said, I don't want you to kind of tip your hand in terms of how you think this poll should go or whatever it should be. Quite honestly, I haven't done my full research yet either, so I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
But how would you tier these teams, right? Like the parity hasn't left the Big 12. I think there's still a lot of parity. There's a lot of teams that I think can contend for a Big 12 championship. So how would you tier these teams? Do you have a 2 tiers? How do you kind of look at it right now?
Yeah, so I'm pulling up the standings because I feel like every time I do this, I wind up forgetting somebody, and then I'm like, oh man, I'm sorry. 16 teams, dude. It's just too hard to make sure that you're getting every single. It's a great question, and I love that you set it up as tiers, because like if you're asking me, okay, who's winning the league right now? I mean, it truly is a fool's errand, and everybody found that out last year with Arizona State being picked last, and then they wind up winning the league. And I mean, we can start there. I mean, it seems like I see Arizona State pretty consistently as the top ranked team in the Big 12, but it's not by much. I mean, I know Joel Klatt, for instance, had like 4 Big 12 teams from like 13 through 17 just lined up, bang, bang, bang. So a lot of people do not feel like there's much separation between all these, but I can run down the list and give you a question mark. Arizona State, like Cam Scadaboo was 40% of the offense.
Yeah, and that's going to be really fascinating to watch.
Yeah, you got a 34-year-old head coach who's dealing with expectations for the first time now. So, as much as I love Kenny Dillingham, I think he is somebody that's a potential star, and clearly Sam Leavitt's a great quarterback, and Jordan Tyson, by the way, man, insane receiver. But I don't know. There's some question marks there with that. Iowa State, if you just go at the top of the standings last year, Iowa State played for a Big 12 title, but man, they had 2 top 3 round NFL wide receivers on that roster that they just lost. And I think Rocco Becht is good, but like those receivers were excellent. I mean, as good as it gets really at the college level. BYU does some of the, I'm not going to call it like luck, but like they got some breaks perhaps in like close games last year. Oklahoma State game obviously comes to mind. Does that regress a little bit? And is Jake Retzlaff a good enough quarterback to keep you in like the top tier? I think Colorado's bound for a drop off. I would put it like this. I think your top tier, I would for sure include Arizona State. I would probably include K-State. I really like Baylor. I'm pretty high on Sawyer Robertson and what that offense is bringing to the table. So I'm going to include somewhat reluctantly Baylor in that top tier. I will give Matt Campbell and Iowa State, just because they have the quarterback back, the nod in the top tier. I do think BYU is bound for a little bit of regression. So as I start to build the next tier, I'm looking at like BYU, TCU, who I think, they deserve to at least be in the conversation. They were a little bit forgotten about, kind of a forgotten team last year. There wasn't a lot of talk about them throughout the year, probably because of how they started, and that loss to SMU sort of buried them in the conversation. But yeah, tier 2, let's see, TCU, Texas Tech, BYU. It's kind of like a second tier for me. And see, look at this. I've forgotten Utah. Utah's in tier 1 for me. I'm not seeing them because they're down at the bottom of the standings. Sorry, Utes. Utah's tier 1. Tier 2, I'm going like Texas Tech, TCU, BYU. Is there anybody else I want to slip into that? I don't trust Oklahoma State to put them there. I think that's kind of how I would tier the top of the league right now. And I'm sure, someone will be mad at me for that, but they're big tiers too. Like I'm including so many teams here. It's just so hard to sort through. I don't even know really what to expect from the preseason poll. I guess I would imagine Arizona State is going to be number 1, but beyond that, I don't really know how like your 2 through 8 is going to shake out.
And I think, we went into last year thinking there was going to be a lot of parity, but I think Utah was still kind of at the top, right? Like everybody was kind of like, well, they probably have the best chance. This year, in my opinion, I feel like it really is much more of a question mark, right? Like I feel like there's so much that could go there. And I think the big question there is because of how Arizona State rose, right? You had a team that was picked last in the conference. Yeah, maybe they had luck on their side. I don't think they were as lucky as, let's say, like a BYU, but they did have players that delivered, right? Like you mentioned Cam Scadaboo, you had Sam Leavitt, you had all these players that were able to do a lot, and it just kind of, you snowball, right? And I think that's the thing with college football is once you start having early success or things start clicking, if you can continue that momentum, it's really hard to stop some of these teams. And unfortunately, Baylor didn't start off the right way. They ended the season phenomenal, right? They ended it really well. You had some of those teams. You have Texas Tech that's infusing as much cash as anybody in the country into a program, But like, does that make them a winning program? I don't know. To me, I'm really curious to see if Arizona State was an anomaly or if it was just a combination of Kenny Dillingham being a phenomenal coach. You got the right combination of different things, and it just kind of worked their way where the schedule kind of worked out, all that kind of stuff. Or do we continue to see something like, who is the Arizona State this year? Could you even predict an Arizona State this year, do you think?
Let's see. If you're going to go, somebody coming from, I won't say like the very bottom, but like a bottom. Honestly, the first one that sticks out when I'm looking at the bottom half of the standings, I don't know if this is totally fair because they are a team that's had some higher expectations the last few years, but perhaps Kansas, Jalen Daniels, there was a real struggle with him at the beginning of the year. I think getting in sync with a new offensive coordinator after they lost Andy Kotelnicki to Penn State. I could see Jalen Daniels being a little bit more comfortable and coming off the injury, I think is the other thing. He was obviously had such an injury-riddled season in 23 that he brings enough high-level upside, and he's got a great coach. I don't think anybody's doubting that Lance Leipold is a great coach. So you give me that combination, I could definitely see Kansas being a surprise. I guess you'd say Oklahoma State just because of Gundy, and I mean that might be the literal, like they will probably be one of the bottom 2 or 3 teams picked in the preseason poll, and Gundy has been such a winner, and it seems like every time you count him out, he's got one more trick left up his sleeve. The only problem there is I just don't know that I believe in their quarterback situation enough to really trust that they'll be consistently winning enough. It seems like Gundy's evolved a bit on NIL and in the portal, and they've upped their game just with some of the guys they've been mentioned with as far as that goes. So maybe I would float that one out there. But other than that, I mean, I don't, West Virginia, I was just listening to Rich Rod on Josh Pate's podcast the other day, talk about how they're going to literally wind up with 70 new players this year, 7-0, like
so
70. So like, I don't know. UCF is really in the same boat with Scott Frost, and I'm like, Scott Frost, I don't know. Houston, I do really like Willie Fritz. I don't think they're ready for that, but they could be a team that really charges up and makes a run. So, but I would have sat here if you would have asked me this question 365 days ago. I would have looked at it and been like, I don't know, Arizona State. Like, what? Why would I? I mean, it was just insane what they were able to do. So those are a couple teams I might float out that'll probably be picked in the bottom half of the standings that I think could make a charge up.
I think you're right on it, and I would probably be pretty similar to what you have. So, coming into the Big 12 last year. Utah, I think Big 12 fans were kind of frustrated with Utah. They came in, thumping their chest, some louder than others. I think generally speaking, Utah fans weren't necessarily collectively that. But you had a large portion of the fan base that just came in thinking that they were going to roll through the Big 12. They were going to continue their winning ways. And, look, maybe if Cam Rising didn't get hurt, maybe that was the case. So it's not fully fair to be able to kind of understand what that could have been. But I think you've seen much more of a mature tone coming in this year, and I think as part of that, there's been an evolution in terms of how the Big 12 fans have viewed Utah. Right? It's been funny with kind of the quote unquote tampering stuff that BYU's been linked to with whether it be Baylor, Oklahoma State, or Utah. There's been kind of a turning of the tide with some of these fans. They're turning toward Utah and being like, "We're sorry that we hated you so much," right? But I guess my real question here is, from your perspective, where do you see Utah in the Big 12 now? Like, what is kind of the perception of the Big 12 now a year later, knowing that they came in expecting to kind of be the top dog?
Yeah, it's such a complicated relationship and such a fascinating one. And you're right. I mean, it got off on the wrong foot, and I won't deny that. Like, yeah, I mean, I mix it up less on Twitter these days than I did when that was really happening a couple of years ago. But I won't deny that I was certainly a part of that, getting frustrated with some of what I was seeing online from a select few Utah fans. But I've had enough back and forth now with some Utah fans who have kind of been like, hey, look, it was a vocal minority of the fans that were out there acting the way that they were on social media. And that's how it happens on social media. And I was certainly guilty of it at the time, of probably buying too much into those who were the loudest out there doing it. So I think the problem is it started before Utah was even in the league, right? Yeah. I mean, we're talking about that year-long battle that was so contentious, and it wasn't just Utah fans, by the way. The whole Pac-12 versus Big 12 thing was really contentious for like a year because and it makes sense. It's an existential threat for everybody and this thing that we love. And it's really an unfair position that the whole poorly governed NCAA ecosystem over the last 20 or 30 years put the prospective fan bases in to be at each other's throats. I mean, it really kind of feels like sometimes like, it's just the rich ruling class wanting everybody else in the lower, poor class, like at each other's throats and arguing with them instead of looking upward and being like, hey, you guys are the ones that are actually screwing everybody. It's a nice distraction to have them fighting with everybody. So I think that's definitely a part of it. But yeah, I think it probably honestly helped the relationship in some ways that Utah did get humbled, albeit by injury in large part, but that Utah got humbled last year because now it feels like maybe everyone is starting a little bit back at square one now. Like, okay, truck stop conference, all the stuff that was being said for a while there, the back-to-back Rose Bowls. Well, now it's been one really humbling year. And before that, a somewhat frustrating year for Utah where they've been brought back down to earth a bit and everybody can take a deep breath. And, the other thing that Utah was dealing with was that BYU came in and really won the affection of a lot of Big 12 fans, media, et cetera. And that I think is for a number of reasons. I mean, they had the complete opposite attitude of it. So you have the Big 12, which is this league that I could speak to the perspective of the Big 12, like this league that was left for dead, that had been left for dead once. I was interning at a radio station in Kansas City back in 2010 when like Nebraska and Mizzou and that whole wave, all those teams left. And, there a lot of time there where we thought everybody was headed to the Big East. I mean, you had been trampled on once, then it happens again. People are writing articles about how your TV deal for the Hateful Eight is only going to be worth like $8 million per school per year in July of 2021. Like, so everybody just took up arms like, hey man, no one's going to fight for us. Like we're just a wounded animal. We got to fight here if we're going to stay alive. So that was already like the attitude. And then you had Utah fans coming in, the loud ones, making overtures about, the truck stop conference and this conference sucks and it's not. So everyone was already revved up, right? Because of what had happened before. So naturally there was going to be a lot of tension there. And then here comes BYU, who's like, man, we're really happy to be here. Like we're stoked. This is great. We love being in a conference. We are excited for this. And that really created a kinship. And it was going on like at the same time that people are looking at Utah fans, the rival of BYU, being ungrateful about being in the league. And so it was like this perfect boiling pot of like, here's how you get a rivalry naturally between Utah fans and the rest of the Big 12. But it does feel to me like a lot of that has settled down. And if we're being honest, like you saw the rankings that I just did of football programs in the league, the Big 12 needs as much cachet as it can get on a national scene. It would be better for the Big 12 if Utah has success. Like Utah going 5-7 every year is not going to be a good thing for the conference because people know and respect the Utah football brand and know and respect Kyle Whittingham. And that's kind of like a trusted, like Utah, for instance, I think would have a much better opportunity to get in the at-large discussion than like BYU did last year when they probably should have been more in the at-large discussion because Utah has more of a college football brand built up in the last decade. And that does matter. If it's instead of Iowa State, Arizona State, BYU last year up near the top, if it's K-State, Oklahoma State, Utah, like everybody thought it might be at the beginning of the year, I think the Big 12 is getting a lot more respect and chatter about an actual at-large bid last year. So it's good for both parties if Utah is successful. And I do think a lot of Big 12 fans, in their heart of hearts, maybe they would admit it on Twitter, maybe they wouldn't. In their heart of hearts, I think most people do kind of realize that. So it's a relationship that frankly needs to get better, I think, for both parties. And it seems like it's definitely headed that way.
It's interesting that you brought that up because I think, you look at this and everybody wants to say, oh, the Big 12 has a lot of parity. And I think, looking at that in relation to the NFL, that's a phenomenal thing, right? The one of the best things about the NFL is that there is parity. However, in college football, it's the absolute opposite. Utah experienced this in the Pac-12 in the sense that people were frustrated when there was parity because the Pac-12 kept getting overlooked. People weren't thinking that it was a good conference. It was only when teams like Oregon, USC, Washington, whatever that may be, when they were at the top and they were the dominant dogs, so to speak, that's when the Pac-12 started to get the recognition. Caleb Williams comes to USC. You get a great coach that comes in there. Suddenly everybody's paying attention to the Pac-12, and it's this elite conference with these elite quarterbacks. And granted, there was a massive glow up in terms of the QB competition, but you have these teams that if they have sustained success, that does help, right? And it's this weird point where, you know, whether that's Utah or somebody else, I don't think it really matters. But if you have a team that is consistent and they can continue to be that top dog, for some reason, there's this natural attraction in college football where, one, you're going to hate that team because they're the top dog, right? But two, you're going to have this attraction where you're going to say, okay, look, they're the dominant. And so suddenly now the Big 12 has this dominant team. The ACC forever had Clemson, right? They were this consistent program that was doing well. Everybody looked at it as like, oh, Clemson, we have to rank them in our top 5 regardless because they're Clemson. That's kind of the nature of college football, and I'm really fascinated to kind of see, especially as these power brands kind of start to, you know, assimilate together and move together, how that's going to be. But I think whether it's in the Big 12 or the ACC or whatever it is, both of these two conferences are still kind of facing that existential threat years down the road. But I think, you know, I'm curious to see, does parity help the Big 12 long term? Or do they need a Utah or some of these other programs, Kansas State, Iowa State, TCU, whatever that team may be, who can have that consistency long-term to be kind of that top dog to help the Big 12? I don't know. What's your general thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a great point. It's so frustrating. Like, Arizona State came out of nowhere. Like, it was literally the Arizona State K-State game, which was in the middle of November, when Desmond Howard was on College Game Day and was like, literally said, why are we picking this game? Like, why are we talking about this game? And, you know, which was such a crazy thing for a number of reasons, because it was on an ESPN network, for one. But that was what people thought about them in late November, you know? And then you fast forward to the college football playoff in the quarterfinals. They are a play away. I mean, they should have beaten Texas, full stop. I mean, they're a play away from it in 2 different ways, whether you get the targeting call or you just make a stop on 4th and 13. Like, that, so it's kind of a ridiculous notion, I guess, is the point, to think that it has to be one of these teams that you trust more, that has more of a reputation built up, because we have seen that on a one-off basis that does not really matter. But it is real. The perception on that is very real. And like I talked about, like BYU's resume, if you're doing a blind resume test, they absolutely should have been right there in the discussion for the final at-large spot, but they were not. They were not a brand that people really trust. And so you see what happens there. So it would behoove the Big 12 as a whole, I do think, if you add 1 or 2 teams that really took over. And I will say, you might have more of an opportunity with that if the next iteration of the playoff goes the way that it looks like it's going, because you'll probably get 2 auto bids. I mean, it looks like it's going to be your 4-4, 2-2, 1-1 setup there, which would mean that you get 2 teams in every single year, which gives more opportunities for a team to be there in the playoff in front of a huge national audience with people paying attention. So it is this weird dichotomy of, like, the new playoff and being set up that way. It makes it less likely for the Big 12 to ever win a national championship, because it's going to be so much harder to win more of those games against high level competition. But I think in terms of building a national brand, it opens up a world of opportunity that wasn't there before. Certainly when it was a 4-team playoff and it was really tough to get in there. If you're in the playoff every year, if Arizona State makes 4 of the next 5 playoffs, like, that will generate a lot of cachet for them. If Utah does it, whoever it might be, that's a huge opportunity, not just in helping the conference in terms of this perception issue, but also building yourself up to be a part of the next wave of whatever college football is going to look like. You know, there's no real assurances on that, how many teams it will include. So if you're trying to ensure that you'll be thought of highly enough to make the cut for whatever that cut line is going to be in a Super League or, you know, NFL model, AFC, NFC with Big 10, SEC, whatever it might be, I do think the next 4 or 5 years are a big opportunity if you can consistently make the playoff by getting one of those 2 spots that likely will be there for the Big 12.
I completely agree. And I want to kind of take this a little step further, and this will be, you know, the last question that I have for you today. And I know you're a busy guy, so you got to kind of do some other stuff, but just kind of add some context. So the NFL draft happened a couple weeks ago. The Big 12 had 31 picks, you know, a good number, but it doesn't compare to the Big 10 and the SEC, which had 26 of the top 32 in the first round. You had 58% of all the picks in the entire 7 rounds. Clearly, the talent has been coming this last draft from those 2 conferences. I think that's kind of a telling point of kind of where the Big 12 and the ACC are right now. So with that being said, how does the Big 12, and we'll wrap in the ACC as well, how do these two programs, which are going to be looked at as kind of tier 2 of the power conferences, stay relevant? Is it private equity? What is it? Like, how do you kind of vision these two conferences specifically kind of staying involved and not being overlooked by these two, even though the odds are stacked against them, right?
Yeah, man, it's really tough. Like, the draft was sobering for sure, because on one hand, I'm opening the Big 12 release and it's like, hey, 31 draft picks. It was tied for the most since 2005. And you're like, oh, okay, well, that seems good. And then you hold it up in the light compared to the Big 10 and SEC, and you're like, oh boy. And it got worse now, right? Because the Big 10 added Oregon and Washington, right? They're adding all these teams and everything is consolidated. This is where you really see the results of the consolidation of the powers in college football, where you're like, well, yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. They have literally like every major program, sans, I guess, Clemson. We'll see what they still are with Dabo these days, but you have basically condensed every one of these programs that's churning out tons and tons of draft picks every single year into those two leagues. So the numbers are just going to look worse and worse, even more so than they were before. And that's going to become a really damning thing. Like, I'll bring up Josh Pate again, because I do think he's one of the most widely listened to and respected voices in college football right now. But he opened his show after that saying, hey, like, let's call a spade a spade. Like, they're playing two different sports. The SEC and Big 10 are playing a different sport than the Big 12 and the ACC, which, again, I would turn him back to Arizona State, Texas to nudge him a little bit. Like, hey, I don't know that that's totally true, but his point is, on a week in, week out basis, there's just so much more talent in those conferences. And it's hard to deny when you see those draft numbers the way that they are. So I think Texas Tech is a really fascinating case study in that. Like, they basically took the approach of like, we've got an opportunity at least for one more year to be in a free for all, pay for play environment. We're going to throw $40 million at this roster. And that's what they were in, the 40 million club, according to the CBS Sports article. We're going to throw $40 million at this roster. We're going to buy the best portal class in America and see where it takes us. And so, can that be a path? I'm sure Texas Tech will have a bunch of guys drafted because of the portal class that they took together. Will going out and just buying that talent be enough to make a discernible difference in getting them in the playoff, or being able to make some noise in the playoff? I'm much more, as you saw, I put them in tier 2. I'm still a little more in believe it when I see it mode with Texas Tech, but you can't argue with the talent that they've infused there. The problem is, not everybody in the Big 12 has Cody Campbell, a multi-billionaire booster that can do that. So on the private equity front, that's obviously where a lot of that comes in. And now I'll get into sort of a different conversation, but obviously related, is Jamie Pollard, the athletic director at Iowa State, spoke recently on a YouTube interview where he was talking about, like, hey, look, like, we don't have $20 million to do this revenue sharing thing. It's going to either have to come. I think he said they have reserves enough to do it for a year or two, but he's like, it's eventually will have to come from subsidies from the university, or like a student fee. Like Virginia Tech just raised a student fee to pay for some of that. But we don't really have that money. And he didn't say private equity, but my next step to that is, well, that's where private equity and private capital comes in, because Jamie Pollard said our choice is we either pay that $20 million or we're Northern Iowa. And so that's the choice staring down a lot of Big 12 schools here, is like, you got to find some creative way to do that, which I know nobody likes private equity and private capital, and it's not ideal, but your choices are become Northern Iowa or take the risk getting in bed with private capital or private equity. Like, that's kind of the reality facing everybody now. It will be very interesting as far as like how talent is dispersed and how recruiting goes once we're in this official revenue sharing era and the House settlement gets passed. It will be very interesting to see the dynamics of how that breaks down, because, I mean, as it's currently written, where they're talking about having Deloitte vet all of these NIL deals that have to be quote unquote fair market value, that would make it a lot tougher to just throw a bunch of, you can't really just money whip guys as much anymore. And as long as you find that $20 million, everybody will be basically on the same playing field in terms of what you're paying. So does that mean it goes back to traditional recruiting advantages? Like, it just goes back to, hey, we have more history, we have better facilities, whatever it might be. And it's not just so much about money, and you wouldn't be able to do the Texas Tech thing as much. Or I know a lot of people fear it turns back into, bags of cash underhanded that no one's finding out about, and more of like a, cheating sort of, and what everybody thought the SEC was doing for a couple of decades there. There are a lot of different ways that it can go. And I think it's kind of impossible to predict exactly what that will mean for how talent gets dispersed. that's part of the issue. There's just so many variables with it that it's hard to know. But what you do know for sure is that the Big 12 is going to be fighting a massive perception problem because of what these draft numbers are going to look like every single year. And it's going to get brought up when you are fighting for an at-large bid and all the SEC fans go through all the hypothetical teams that they would beat, right, at the end of the year. Like, they'll bring that up and say, hey, look at the draft disparity. Of course, Alabama would wax BYU or Miami, or whoever it might be that's competing for this last spot, because we just have so much more talent. So there are clear issues there, and I don't know that there's a great solution, but that is why I do appreciate Brett Yormark, because I think he's willing to explore any potential solution there.
Yeah, and I think that's, you need a conference commissioner that's willing to at least understand where money can come, right? I know, his comments about private equity and everything, they get people nervous, and for good reason, right? Private equity has potential to absolutely change college football. And so getting into that is not an easy situation, but you have athletic departments like Kentucky going into an LLC. You've got other programs that are doing different things to try to infuse this cash. And so it's going to be really fascinating to kind of see how this all develops, because I don't think there's one clear strategy, right? And maybe Brett Yormark can do that for the Big 12, but even then there's nothing from an NCAA level or even from an athletic department level from each school to really bring consistency. Deloitte, yes, they're going to say that they're going to do it, but in my opinion, I'll believe it when I see it, right? And so I think that's where this is going to be a challenge. So it's never a dull moment. It's always going to be fun, but that's why we enjoy the sport, and hopefully we can maintain some of that, right? Like, I'm not quite as dire in the sense that I think college football is dying. I think it's actually grown a ton, and I think there's still a lot of potential, but I understand why people are frustrated with it. So it'll be interesting. But John, I appreciate you joining me. It's always great. We'll get to chat in Dallas or Frisco, Texas, I guess, for the Big 12 Media Days here in July. We'll have more information coming from that. But just tell everybody where they can find you. Obviously, you've got a lot of stuff out there, so kind of shoot your shot right here.
Yeah, appreciate that. Happy to chat anytime, man. Yeah, if you're a Big 12 fan, definitely check out the YouTube channel. Just John Kurtz, JohnKurtz, is the YouTube channel there. I try to go live twice a week. It's usually Wednesday and Sunday, and then clip out stuff from those shows as well. The newsletter, Open for Business, ofbnews.com, to sign up for Open for Business. It's totally free. Comes to your inbox multiple times per week. I try to break down these big picture stories like this and how it affects the Big 12, and then hit you with some quick hitters, everything that you might have missed throughout the week. If you are interested in purely K-State talk, you can also find the 3MA podcast, like we say EMA at K-State, but that with a 3 at the beginning, 3MA podcast, wherever you find podcasts. And you can follow me on Twitter at JL Kurtz.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and we'll chat with you later.
All right. Anytime, Josh.
I want to thank John for joining me on my podcast today. I thought he had a lot of great insight. I think, like he said, he owned up some of the stuff with kind of his comments about Utah and joining the Big 12 and different things that way. But I think that's the nature of this, right? Like, I think it's tough knowing that all of these programs were kind of left for dead to some extent, right? And so everybody was feeling vulnerable at the time. Utah obviously didn't want to go into a conference that it felt like was different from what they felt was a good conference in the Pac-12. And so it was a challenge. It was, interesting, the timing, and I think there's been a lot of changes since then. And I think, the Big 12 remains a great conference for Utah. And if Utah can kind of get its act together and have some consistency, there's a real potential that Utah could be that team that leads out and is the one that can kind of be the face of the Big 12 if they can continue on this consistent path. So that's it for today's podcast. I appreciate you listening. Next week we'll dive into the offensive look. This week we did the defensive look, obviously. If you didn't listen to that episode, go back and listen to it. I did that on Monday, where I broke down each position and kind of talked about the different things that way. We'll go through the offense. There's still some stuff in the transfer portal and Utah trying to get some guys, but for the most part, the roster's set, and we'll break those down and kind of talk about Utah's opportunity there. So with that, we'll sign out. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch you next week.